and welcome to the Ultimate You podcast. We're here to help you evolve mentally, emotionally, and physically through mindset, nutrition, and training. And I'm with two epic individuals. We have Dr. Mac and Ryan Gambin, and of course me, Andy Anderson. Team, welcome.
Good morning. Good morning.
Cam intro, mate. I absolutely love your energy on your intros.
Thank you, my man. I've had a lot of practice. And we've got a lot of energy to put into today's topic, don't we?
Yeah, let's go. Good.
Because
good,
it's
good
everyone's
topic.
favourite topic at the moment, and especially ours, and that's glute training and leg training.
Got to say, three blokes sitting around a table talking about glutes.
I know. It's dangerous.
Out of control.
We've got to keep it very PC.
We'll see where it goes.
That's right. No, but in all seriousness, this topic is going to add a lot of value to our listeners.
Yeah.
For both guys and girls, but I think predominantly the female listeners are going to get a lot out of today because we know how important a good set of glutes and legs are to the female physique athlete and just individuals in general.
Yeah, I think that's important too to everybody. Athletes in general. I think, you know, the way I class it right now is everyone gets so pumped up about superfoods. When they find something new, it's a superfood. I think right now, if we were to talk about glutes are the super muscle right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. Been on the radar for a while, and in physique space especially, but in the athletic space, absolutely, from everything, jump, run, change direction, you know, the whole works. So, there's a bunch of content here to get through, yeah.
Absolutely. And so much so that I think we're seeing a shift in just society in general where, yes, good glutes and legs are really important, but now we're seeing like incredible surgeries sweep the world where the Kardashians are injecting huge amounts of whatever into their bums to get that booty look. And we're going to show you how to do it right here, right now, the legitimate way. We're going to show you how to do it the legitimate way.
That is a point that I wanted to bring up. Let's make sure that we leave here today knowing the difference between, say, a good set of glutes and a big butt.
Absolutely.
You know, like I can appreciate a good set of glutes, beautiful hamstring tie-in, but I'm still not on board with the whole big butt.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, I'm not going to touch that, but but yeah, in terms of from a show perspective on stage, you know, shows in bikini and that, win shows from behind, right?
It's so important,
you know, and that's across a lot of sports, a lot of categories, I suppose, within the physique space. You know, it's all pretty equal until they do the rear shot, and then we find out, you know, who's who in the zoo, and most girls train a lot of glutes, you know, hitting their glutes 5 days a week, which I think we need to talk about as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, not a lot else, right? You know, there's a bit of quad work getting done and maybe a little bit of hamstrings. And
it's been quite amazing to see the difference in the physiques, particularly on stage, now that all this emphasis has been put on glutes and really what these girls can achieve on their backside,
For sure.
It is. It's fun, isn't it?
Glutes and delts. Glutes and delts.
It is very impressive.
If you've got nice
the amount of
delts,
muscle mass.
You've got and you've developed some glutes, and so we'll talk about it, but because there's some, I think a lot of girls, the beauty of training glutes is from a muscle development perspective, you can almost do anything and they'll grow. Everyone can grow their glutes, and so it's probably, you know, a chat around, you know, exercise selection and how we can do that, because from a muscle fiber distribution perspective, not to get too technical too quick, but
no, I'm looking forward to you getting into that.
You know, fiber distribution is really well suited to loading them up heavy, but also a ton of volume. You can, so that means the body weight band work will work, as will the heavier stuff.
And it can handle repetition and frequency day after day.
All
It
day.
can, exactly right.
A ton of it. More so than probably any other muscle in the body.
That's right.
I would suggest.
Do you think we should kick off this subject? I know you're quite passionate about it. We've had discussions in the past, Mac. Should we kick this off with the whole inactive glutes conspiracy that's so predominant these days? I think I might let you take that one.
We love conspiracies. Let's dig in.
Stuart McGill, he's quite famous for coining it glute amnesia.
Yeah, and that's disappointing to hear from someone like that. Reality is this, and I've done a few different, you know, presentations on glutes and that sort of thing. There's a couple of misnomers, whether it's semantics or whatever, but because we talk about glute activation work and that sort of thing. So
major buzzword right now.
Yeah, if you can stand up, your glutes are working, right?
Yeah.
And the problem I see in our world is we'll see a trainer or somebody looking at a person from behind doing a deadlift, and they've got shorts on or tights on, and they're saying you're not activating your glutes. Good luck. You know, what, you got X-ray vision? Like, you know, how are you going to determine that?
Yeah.
There's a chat. So the amnesia thing is garbage. Like 100%.
So where did this come from? Where did this concept of the glute amnesia?
Well, I think
stem
it
from?
originated with prolonged static postures in, say, a seated position, hip flexion position, and the rationale was sort of broadly that inactivity all day led to this switching off of the glutes.
Are we misinterpreting, or is everyone misinterpreting this for just basically weakness, right?
Probably, yeah. But, you know, activation is just a fancy word for warm up, as far as I'm concerned. But where it's interesting is I see a lot of the girls. So it's the band work, it's the clams and the frog pumps and all that sort of stuff, which is all very appropriate for your warm up / activation.
Yes,
but there's actually a fair bit of literature saying that too much of that will actually really compromise your power outputs and your
later in the workout.
You know, so. You know, I see a lot of people, they might spend 35, 40 minutes on their activation exercises. Well, you know,
when you're burned out by the time you're getting in. That's
workout,
right.
You know, so which is fine, but amnesia is not a thing. I mean, you know,
you can almost get it. I can almost get it with the feel. You know, females in particular, they love that burn. They love that isolated feel, and they achieve that with mini bands. Max called me out once. We had a quick conversation. I was training an influencer, and I'm not guilty.
I don't remember this, but anyway.
That's all right. You call me out all the time, mate, and I appreciate it. I was training an influencer, and I was using mini bands as a warm-up. Now, I might even said in the post part of activation or something like that, and Mac was straight on. Come on, mate, you know better than that. But I will admit that I use mini bands and clams and things like that as a tool. I did write this back to you, and you didn't write back to me.
Oh.
Too busy, mate, with all your literature.
No, that's not true.
Free advice.
Is this a therapy? It's turned into a therapy session.
Let's break it up, boys. Let's break it up.
Mate, I don't want to fight. All right, it's all right.
Back to my
Nothing but
point.
love.
So I get it because I use mini bands and I use them as part of my warm-up and activation sequence, but it's more so for my client to have an understanding of the feeling that I'd like them to feel during the major workout, or the major lifts. So like glute med in particular, you know, there's the cues of pulling, you know, when you're squatting, separating the floor apart or standing on newspaper and talking it out. I like those cues and I acknowledge and accept those cues, but I think there's just a fraction of information missing where when we say things like tear the floor apart or talk the newspaper apart, you need to do that from the hip or from the glute med in particular. And that's why I use mini bands to put a bit of resistance on that muscle and to really get my client or athlete to have that feeling. And basically it's almost like riding a bike. Once we achieve that feeling, we can translate that to the major lifts and stop wasting our time with stuff like that.
So you train a lot of high profile people and you get a lot of influencers coming to you. Is a lot of the female influencers coming to you for glute and leg specific training and development? What are they normally chasing? What questions are they asking?
Well, yeah, I mean, in regards to females, I mean, predominantly lower body exercise, and of course, there's so much emphasis put on the glutes these days. You know, I'm a major lift guy, and a lot of the times, the female, well, if we're talking about females in particular, they come expecting, you know, the cable kickbacks and things like that. I'm all about making their squat better and making their deadlift better and lunging and getting the major lifts. And I think cueing is so important and feeling and understanding that your glutes extend the hips. And and having that visualization and feeling that throughout the major lifts like the squats and deadlifts.
It's a good point, man, because I'm not anti-bands at all. I think they play a really important role in it. And whatever terminology that you use, whether it's you know, tear the floor apart or flare your feet or whatever terminology, it's all very appropriate. And you'll work in, I mean, glute med, you'll recruit glute med. But the thing, you know, we see a lot on social media, right? We see a lot of people that are pumping out a lot of content, you know, doing various exercises. I look at a lot of girls doing really high-end, advanced exercises that the beginner or the person who's perhaps not so experienced is gonna just hurt himself doing. And I'm talking about you know crazy sort of Nordic hamstrings and stuff like that, where you want to tear your hamstring, that's what you're going to do, right? But the overwhelming comment I have about glutes is because women and humans, we all have different shaped pelvises, and women in particular can have quite a lot of variation in terms of their pelvic width. Where sort of the acetotabular joint and acetotabular femoral joint, where the femur joins into the acetabulum of the pelvis. So some girls will have a really wide pelvis. They'll have really wide greater trocanas, which are the sides of the hips. So they're quite a pear shape, for example. Versus some girls will have, they won't have that at all, and they have quite a narrow pelvis.
Yes.
Their glutes and the exercises that you would do to hit them are going to be quite different because they can all develop glutes, but they've just got to play around with exercises and find the feel, like what works for them. Because some girls might deadlift and their glutes will grow, whereas that mightn't be certainly wouldn't be the main exercise I would give girls to make their glutes grow. The thrust has taken over the world, right? And I see a lot of girls doing the wrong thing with the thrust, just heaving it up, turning it into a full body exercise, and it's not about that either. But then another girl might grow just from doing like some band work with really high volume. And just got to figure it out.
So how would you say, what's the best way for the listeners right now? The girls are like, okay, well, how the F do I figure it out? Is it mainly about the feel, or is it when they're feeling that burn, when they're feeling that activation, is that the sign that they're looking for to grow? Or what else are the sort of benchmarks that you would point out for everyone listening?
I think that's a great point just to start with. You know, like a lot of people, even just training generally, you got to sort of learn how to train. And a lot of people come into the gym environment brand new, and they're not really, you know, we talk about, is that near your max? They don't even know what their max looks like. They've never been anywhere near it. So there's a whole process of just familiarization and learning how to train. So those exercises where you feel the glute, and you feel that, and it's like, yeah, geez, that's burning. You know, I can really feel that. That's where you start, right? So then you go, okay, well, that's the sort of feel you now need to be familiar with, so that when you're doing a completely different exercise, are you feeling that sort of feel? If the answer is no, well, okay, maybe that's just mechanically not geared towards you. Let's try something else, because there's a bunch of exercise. It's just, you want to hit your bicep, there's only a few ways you can really hit your bicep, whereas if you want to hit your glutes, there's so many ways. 100 ways you can hit your glutes.
Can I just double down on your statement about learning? Because I think that's something that's so crucially overlooked. You know, the gym is a somewhat fairly straightforward place. We isolate muscles when we could contract them. And, you know, most people, when they join a gym or get a trainer, they're looking for results. They're not looking to learn something new. So they want to see results. So, but I think the reason I wanted to double down on that point of going through a learning phase and establishing proper technique is because it pays dividends down the track. If you don't go through that learning phase, I have this saying where I have all my guys come into the gym, we have to go through the learning phase so we can establish stability. When we establish stability, then we establish greater confidence. When we have greater confidence, then we train harder, and that's when it pays dividends.
Absolutely.
So I really wanted to make a point of that learning phase, that, you know, because I get it. When people join the gym, they go, okay, I want to lose fat, I want to build muscle, I want to see results. Hurry up and give it to me. Let's do the exercises.
Yeah, and I think you can do that and satisfy the results at the same time. So, you know, you can familiarise people with those exercises and get them going with that. You can maybe hit some isolation stuff early, so they're still going to get some volume in, and then they'll grow. But at the same time, you're teaching them a whole lot around just their general awareness of their body, you know.
And that's how you'll structure their training session, depending on that individual.
And then depending on how they perceive their results. So if their results are in the mirror, you know, or whether their results are on the bar, because I'm seeing everyone wants to deadlift a house at the moment. You know, I see bikini girls doing 1RMs, and I'm not really understanding why they want to do that. Because it's not about strength, right? That's a completely different podcast. But also realising expectations. So that's a conversation around, you know, I talk a lot about the shape of the pelvis has a huge amount to do with this, right? And we talk about, the sacrum part of the pelvis and the slope of that. So whether it's quite curved or whether it's quite flat. So So for example, and it leads into a conversation around posterior chain and the lumbar spine, because it's all interactive, right?
Absolutely.
But, so people who have quite a sort of a large slope to their sacrum will tend to have a lordotic spine, so their bum will sort of stick out a little bit towards the back, and they'll develop that bubble butt pretty well.
Yes.
Versus someone who's got a really flat sacrum, their pelvis is posteriorly tilted.
Yep.
And they've got a flat bum.
That's right.
Right. The flat bum girl can still grow her glutes, no probs, right? But it's a different it's a
volume.
completely different approach.
That's right. Yeah.
And so that's where, when someone walks in and they go, I want a butt like that. There's also a conversation around, well, we can do crazy stuff and improve your butt. But whether or not it ends up looking like that,
That's right.
I'm not sure. Plus,
Realistic expectations
There's
are
another
important.
conversation there, but the take-home message is 100%. Everyone can improve their gluteal development, no question.
Yeah.
And the really cool thing is playing around with it and different exercises and rep ranges and the band
Intensity
work,
techniques.
techniques. All of that. It's your basic exercise prescription 101, right? Which is good because the variety is huge, and girls are hitting them 3 or 4 times a week, which I don't have a problem with. But if you're going to hit the same thing every day, they don't have a problem. You got to mix it up. And
Absolutely.
we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But so I think that's a pretty cool place to start around that expectation, the training, and structurally, giving some information around that, and that even when you get into there's the pelvis and the lower back, and I know Ryan's pretty passionate about some of the things he sees with posterior chain stuff, upper lower cross syndrome, things like that. So it all plays a role.
Yeah.
And then even from the muscle perspective within the glute, you can break the glute. So we talk mostly about glute max, gluteus maximus, and medius. Even you can break those. There's various bands of the glute max, and there's 3 bands of your medius. So you can hit them in different directions, in different angles, and so. That's important consideration as well around how you can sort of do that. So, and I even talk about there's exercises I talk a lot about you can hit your upper glute and your lower glute, and you can hit it laterally.
Yes.
And so mechanically there's exercises like, for example, a thrust where the pelvis and the femur move. So we're talking about hip extension, right? The glute extends the hip, which means your foot goes backwards effectively, right? We're extending the hip. So the pelvis you can keep your femur stable, like a deadlift, like a stiff leg deadlift, for example. You pivot like a hinge type thing, hip hinging. So the pelvis is doing all the movement, but your femur is stable, right? Versus an exercise like a reverse hyper, where your pelvis is stable and your femur works. Yeah. So there's 2 different ways of looking at it that way as well. And so you want to hit your upper glute, you would do it the first way. So your femur is going to be pretty stable.
So your RDL for your upper glute.
Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah. And then for your lower glute, you might hit your reverse hyper and things like that. And then the combo is the thrust, which is a bit of both, right? So. There's a real art.
Where do we sit on the thrust, Mac?
It's where you start. You got to be, I think thrusting is an important part of it for glute isolation work.
Yep.
And mostly from a aesthetic perspective. Yeah. It's not a compound, multi-joint, multi-muscle, multi-plane type movement for an athletic
I'm yet to
population.
See some high-end strength athletes really employ a hip thrust.
Oh, I wouldn't even have them do it. I mean, hip thrusts. Hip thrusts are not new. They've sort of hit the world off the back of Brett Contreras' work.
Brett.
Yeah, and you know what? Hats off, right? The guy's done some great work in that space. He's been prolific and good on him. But I mean, he probably brought it to the fitness industry, but it's been around in rehab. So we've been doing glute bridges I'm physio by trade, right? So in terms of hamstring rehab, glute bridges have been around forever, so it's just a modification of that.
Just putting load on it.
Yeah, and then, whatever you want to term it, like, so whether your shoulders are on the floor, whether that's your version of a bridge, or whether your shoulders are on a bench, you got a slightly different arrangement. And then it comes down to like the angle of your tibia. So, your lower shank. So you want to talk about that. We'll get to it in a minute, but I've gone down a rabbit warren. But so there's a ton of stuff there that sort of comes into it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, glutes look great. There's a lot of benefits to having great glutes and legs, but what are some of the benefits, the other benefits of having strong legs and glutes. Like, what I love to do to get people motivated in any realm is I stack the value of a certain topic or thing in my mind. So yes, your glutes are going to look great. That's awesome. That's one reason to wake up at 4 a.m. and get in the gym and smash it out. Yeah, but what other benefits are we going to find for, again, just being strong in that area?
Well, that's my jam at the moment. You know, that's what I live and breathe and kind of what I base a lot of my training around.
Yeah.
What I realized when I started thinking about this subject was, you know, so much of my training is based around ground reaction force and vertical jump, because it's just such a great performance measure. One thing I went down a rabbit hole when I was working with golf in particular.
Yeah.
I was working very closely with the Titleist Performance Institute, and Dr. Greg Rose from that institute, he came up with, basically he can predict how far you can hit a golf ball based off your vertical jump.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's quite accurate when it comes to it. Now, of course, you know, your golf swing and technique has to come into it, but if you have an efficient golf swing, he can basically predict how far you can hit a golf ball, all due to ground reaction force. So for those listeners that don't know what that is, it's basically the force that you can create. You generate that force and you drive it into the ground. That rebounds off the ground depending on the surface that you're standing on, and then you receive that force back, and then you translate that in the golf swing, for example. That force travels up through the body, through the midsection, passes down through the arms, through the club, into the club head, and you deliver that force to the ball. So the more force that you can create into the ground, that's how much force you can deliver to the golf ball. So now that I work with combat sports, you know, I haven't seen the literature and I don't think there's been studies on it, but I think it would be pretty fair to assume that that equation can be related to how hard you can throw a punch.
Yeah, wow.
Because any good martial artist knows that your punch is generated out of the ground.
Yeah.
So that's why I get excited. And that's why I got excited about golf. I mean, to be honest, watching golf, I've got zero interest in watching golf.
It's up there with cricket, isn't it?
Exactly. But the explosive nature of that single event of hitting the golf ball, to me, that's pretty cool. And watching the biomechanics come into play.
Absolutely.
And of course, I love watching a guy throw down and generate power out of the ground. So, you know, that's why I get off on this subject and why I place a lot of emphasis around the glutes to basically increase ground reaction force.
That's cool, man. And yeah, on a similar stream of thought is around, so there's a lot of work being done. I'm doing a lot of stuff at the moment around, you can determine the potential for muscle mass development based on anthropometric characteristics, which is your skeleton.
Yeah, wow.
So, so we're looking at a whole range of measurements of pelvis width and shoulder width and things like that, and shank length, so the length of your humerus and femur and stuff like that. Yeah. And you can accurately determine the optimal amount of muscle mass that someone should carry. Yeah. So we're doing it mostly in American football at the moment.
Yes.
Because, you know, I've done a lot of work in footy codes and stuff like that, and it's always bigger, stronger, faster, meaner, leaner, right? Yes. And so, but there's a tipping point, and this is getting a little bit off track, but there's a tipping point where that leads to an increased risk profile around injury and hamstring injuries in particular. But you make good points, Ryan, around from an athletic population perspective, because when I think of glutes, I think of the vertical propulsion, so your counter movement jumps, so your sports that involve jumping. Then you've got horizontal propulsion, which is your sprinting, your change of direction, your field sports and things like that. So because we know, like you think about a triple extension position, and most people will know what I'm talking about there. So it's hip extension, knee extension, and plantar flexion. Yeah. So at the ankle, the knee, and the hip. So you think about you want to jump, you need to go into triple extension, right? And so that's squats, that's deadlifts, that's all that sort of stuff, right? Mostly done in an upright position where you're going upwards, right? Yes. And versus a horizontal position, which is your sprinting position, which is a really different force potentiation, ground contact forces, and that sort of thing. So, you know, so you take, for example, the thrust, right? The thrust really loads up glute max, right? Yeah. So if I want to go into a hyperextension, hip extension position, so I'm in extreme hip extension for a triple extension when I'm running at peak velocity with knee flexion, then my hamstring's in a shortened position and I'm loading glute. So if you're a sprinter, you know, thrusts are very reasonable for you to be working into your program. Things like that, you know, are another layer for an athletic population.
Absolutely. And so choice of exercise is obviously going to be different between a sort of sport application and a physique application. Yeah.
When we're talking about things like your triple extension and basically like plyometric based exercises, Mac, what's your opinion on how well do they translate to growing muscle?
Oh, not particularly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you want to grow muscle, you need a few things, right? There's a volume load. You need so you need mechanotransduction. You need to load the muscle up. You need volume, and you need a little bit of damage to initiate some of the cellular propagation and things like that. So, I think it starts early, right? So, you see kids that come through and they do gymnastics or they do things like that, and they're sprinters and little athletics and things. Those kids will have quite well developed lower limbs, right? Or it's a crazy one, like kids who ride horses when they're little. Like equestrian type things. So they're constantly in a position where they're doing like an ISO squat.
Yeah, I was going to say, or isometric.
Yeah, they're basically doing an ISO squat. And I know a couple of girls in the bikini, in the pro IFBB bikini girls who rode horses as a kid.
Yeah.
They have glutes that are like basketballs, like it perfectly round.
That's so interesting.
That was their secret. So it starts early, but so the plyometric thing from a hypertrophy perspective, I don't think you need it.
Yeah, interesting.
I think you can just isolate. If you just want to hypertrophy, like you just want to load up and grow your glutes, you can be pretty fundamental with your exercises, I think, and you can be pretty isolated as well. But
I just ask because I tend to always incorporate some kind of, maybe it's just me with my I just can't help but be an athlete, but even with my physique competitors, I always incorporate some form of like plyometric, like whether it be a kettlebell swing or a form of jumping or, I just feel like that, or even it may perhaps those exercises help translate to better, bigger lifts. On the major lifts.
There's absolutely a piece to that. So, so when it comes to strength development, you've either got a neural adaptation, so that's motor unit recruitment, twitch summation, potentiation, all that sort of stuff, right? And then you've got cross-sectional area, right? So this is why you don't have to be super strong to grow. You don't have to, you've got volume versus intensity, right? So the combination of using plyos and heavy movements increases your ability to do greater volume with a heavier load.
Yes.
Right? So that's where you're coming from.
And
that absolutely works, 100%. And that's the justification for bikini girls doing heavy squats. Yeah. I mean, you look at it and you go, it's not a strength sport. Who cares, right? But if I can now do a 1RM with 100 kilos, it means I can do 8 reps with 80 instead of 8 reps with 60.
Yes.
So your overall volume increases.
My overall volume
load
stronger. Is going to be greater. And from a recruitment perspective, we'll see a shift from type 1 to type 2. Type 2s are bigger, just and the distribution of those. And so that's the rationale for it. And also variety and just recruitment patterns, it makes good sense, right? To be more we don't want to get into a functional conversation when it talks about glutes, but that's where it's at. Because if you want to talk like technically with vertical jumps and vertical propulsion, I've got a couple of notes here. The types of exercises that really load it up are Zercher squats.
Love them.
Even I hate the kneeling squat. You see, the kneeling squat where people kneel on the ground in a Smith machine and do a squat.
Oh, just eliminate the knees.
Yeah, but it does load up your glute. So, anyway, let's not go there. Sumo deadlifts, those corner positions.
Yes.
Sorry, I was going to get back to that, the kneeling squat. Too much axial load because they can move so much and it's not exactly...
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. I look at that and I just go... Really?
Yeah.
There's other ways. I get a bunch of those exercises. Yeah. That's another podcast that I was just looking at. Go, okay, it's a long bow, but if that's what you want to run with, for sure. It's like people walk. I don't want this. We're always positivity, not negativity.
That's right.
But people on a stepper who throw their leg out the back. That ain't helping you. I'm sorry, that's not helping you grow your glutes. I'm sorry. I mean, if
that's just for Instagram videos. That's
if that's what you want to do,
you're
that's
either
cool.
catching the attention of the dude in the corner there,
and it fucking works.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah,
everyone
for sure. It works. Yeah, I do it all the time. I do it all the time. Yeah,
I saw you doing that. I knew that was you the other week.
Were you doing the cross-legged walk too, sideways up
and a curtsy squat and a curtsy.
You look good. You look good.
Yeah, I'm pumping it, man. Yeah.
You got a list? Sorry, continue.
No. I was just going to say versus the horizontal propulsion, which which is your hip thrust, which is bent leg reverse hypers and things like that. So it's pretty cool. You can mix it up.
Do you like accommodating resistance for hypertrophy?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's if it's done properly,
For the listener, I'm talking bands and chains.
Yeah, for sure. And and then you get into a conversation around time under tension, and I think that's an important piece to it as well. But I think they're more advanced. The rationale around that is pretty advanced, and I don't think people have to understand that to do it. So it's all good.
Can I? No, yeah, the rationale is advanced. I actually sometimes I use bands and chains for more beginners. And my rationale for that is with the accommodating resistance. So for example, a deep squat, so a squat, I think it helps my guys that are learning how to squat, even the subconscious fact that the load becomes lighter towards the bottom.
Yeah.
So kind of gives them a little bit more confidence and a way to establish proper stability. So it gets lighter towards the bottom and then it gets heavier towards lockout. So I've used that a fair bit in regards to hypertrophy in the past as well.
Yeah. So I think you can mix it up. Sorry, man. But like I probably used a lot of the chans, the bands and all that for more athletic populations.
Yeah, of course. So that's where it sort of derives from.
Yeah. And absolutely, for sure. It's good. And rehab, right? Yeah. Hugely beneficial. And those applications can be made for a physique athlete for sure.
Yeah.
Could you finish what you're speaking about in regards to Zercher squats?
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, why do you like them? You like that posterior chain recruitment?
Yeah.
So Zercher squats where you hold the barbell in your forearm and get to work.
Yeah, I don't do them, but I think there's the trade-off is load.
Yeah.
And the wrist position associated with that. And I'm talking, for the upper limb and things like that. But in terms of variation, for sure, they're not particularly comfortable to do. You get
a lot of training.
So there's a lot of training. But I think they're just something we can mix up. Same with Brozovs and a whole bunch of those things. From a variation perspective.
Yeah, I love them. Love carry. I love carries.
Yeah, carries are good. Sled pushes. There'd be my top, sort of 10 exercises for glutes,
So on that note, what are the top, let's give some golden nuggets for all the listeners out there, all the girls. What are the top 5 booty exercises for growth? Because we're talking about there's a difference between sort of performance and sports related and then just hypertrophy.
Let's talk growth. We're putting some junk in the trunk.
That's right. So let's get some bigger glutes. Right now, what are the top 5 exercises
what are yours,
you guys?
Big unit?
Well, I mean, personally, I can't go past a good squat.
Yeah.
So good squat's first on my list, and I think just coming from a coach's point of view, establishing a good squat is going to translate to good technique on almost all your other.
Do you
lifts.
always start your workout? So if you're going to do heavy squats and barbell squats. Do you always start your workouts with the squat, or are you doing it
unless it depends on the goal? Usually most technically demanding exercises first.
That's right.
And then we build into more hypertrophy sequences after that. But I do. I like to start with maybe a strength emphasis for that reason that we spoke about before. Increasing total strength can increase total volume and load that we use on the other exercises.
Yes.
So in general, if that were the goal, I'd start with say a heavier squat and then move on to more sort of specific or isolated exercises.
Yeah. And so I'm going with thrust, and I'll tell you why, and only because I hit the research. So you'll get about 300% greater glute max recruitment doing a thrust properly than a squat.
Say that again. That's awesome.
So about 300% greater glute max recruitment doing a thrust properly. Versus a standard squat.
Take note, people. That's a great stat. Thank you.
Yeah, and because when you get into it, because it's quite isolated, right? Whereas with a squat, I see a lot of people modify their squat technique to use glutes predominantly. And we can talk about some mechanics in a minute, because I think what people do at the top of their squat matters. And I see a lot of people, like say, I use the term they drop their pelvis or they tuck their pelvis underneath because someone's telling them they need to squeeze their glutes and they go into a posterior pelvic tilt. So what happens then is you go into a closed pack position of your lumbar spine and you take all the load off your glute. You actually put all the load onto your spine. So I see girls doing that in the gym. I go, please don't do that.
So you're talking about, I can visualize it right now on of course, all the Instagram videos when the sports model or whoever it is under the barbell, at the top of their rep, they squeeze their butt and it kind of shoots forward and tucks under, right?
Yep. Two things. Yeah. 2 points to be,
And they're doing it with good intentions, aren't they?
For sure. They're trying to recruit more glute. And it goes into an isometric position and you'll feel it in your glute, but the load on your bar mostly then goes into your back.
Yes.
And so 2 things. So at the bottom of your squat, the minute your pelvis, so you go into your lower squat, right? And the minute your pelvis starts to tuck under, it's over.
Yeah.
Get out of the squat position and go back up, right? Because you're completely changing the mechanics of your squat.
Yeah.
Which is referred to butt wink.
100%, right? There's your butt wink. I never called it that, but really? Yeah, butt wink. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. And then at the top,
Yes.
you want to go into a upright position, but you don't want to go into a position where you tuck your bum under. You want to go into stand upright, but you might be still a 5-degree hip flexion position, and that'll keep the tension on your glutes. The other one's reverse hyper, which is never really done very well because there are some machines out there that enable you to do a hyper. So for people listening, I'm talking about lying prone, so belly down on a bench, your leg is straight and you're lifting your foot up off the ground.
Yeah.
And there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either do it with a bent knee or a straight leg. But either way, when you're doing your reverse hyper, it's comparable to thrusts for glute max development.
Yes.
Really loads it up. So if you keep your legs straight, you'll get a fair bit of bicep femoris, which is the biarticular muscle in the hamstring group, particularly the long head of your bicep femoris. If you bend your knee, you'll take that out of the game, and so you'll just isolate your glute. So there's a couple of little things you can do there.
Amazing.
So yeah,
Right.
and even with your bridging. There's a couple of different versions of bridging, whether your shoulders on the floor and your feet are on a bench, or whether your shoulders are on a bench and your feet are on the floor. If you want to work your hamstring, keep your legs straight. If you want to work your glute, bend your knee. So little things like that, and even your heel position. If you want to push through your heel, so your heel should be on the bench, not your flat foot.
Yes.
A couple of little things there.
Yeah.
They're just nuances around coaching tips.
Yep.
Great.
I like really high bench step ups.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
So that you're in a, and I'm talking probably about 60, 70 metre high bench,
Yes.
like quite high.
Yes.
So you're in, and if you visualise that, you're in full hip flexion and you will extend right up to stand on top of
Yeah.
the box. Like those a lot, and keep your pelvis nice and square. What we see with people who have weak glutes is this Trendelenburg position where you'll drop to one side, and you see that when you walk behind someone and they look loose through the hips, and they'll drop their butt on either side when they're walking. That's called a Trendelenburg gait, which is indicative of weak glute med. Because glute med's role, amongst other things, is really to stabilise the pelvis, and more so than being a brute force developer. It works in external rotation, of course, and everyone knows that, and abduction. Abduction just means you take your leg out to the side. So there's a few things like that.
I like high step ups too, but I feel like I lose a lot of the eccentric phase because I feel like most people just when they step down, they kind of
just drop it down.
Well, I was going to ask that.
Yeah.
Often the way I like to do those is keep it really controlled, point my toes up, slightly touch the ground with the heel, and then just so it's all the load on the leg. But of course, so many people do the step down, release, basically bounce off the floor, and it takes a lot out of the exercise. So again, when you're coaching people through, is that how you're focusing their movement on the eccentric, nice and slow, hardly touch the ground, straight back up?
Yeah.
You guys
But it
both agree
is
with
it's
that?
hard to do.
Super challenging. It's super challenging.
I like deficit reverse lunges.
Yeah, and 100%. And with that sort of thing, you've got to forget the load, right? People want to lift it, like put a ton of weight on their back, and you might get there eventually, but
start
early on, it's not about.
And that's not particularly the exercise, is it? And that's where your exercise.
That's right. You load it up another way.
Yeah.
You load it up with your squats, your deads, your thrusts, and stuff like that. But from bringing a bit of more dynamic movement into it, sled drives, we get back into that horizontal propulsion position. Get a lot of glute with that. And you can mix that up. Like I see a lot of people do really heavy sleds and they're hardly moving it. And I go, I don't know. Whereas, versus a light sprint type sled, I think you need to mix it up a little bit.
Great.
Because I think if you're just pushing a sled, and it's a complete heave and it's, you're hardly moving it, you're getting some glute activation. But, I think you still want sort of a decent tempo to your exercise movement.
Similar to the step up. Again, it's the exercise sort of predicting what kind of load that you'll use and what is most appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. I like Romanians. The thing with I'm covering a lot of territory here, but the thing that a lot of I think people forget when they're doing Romanians and even stiff leg deadlifts. Once you go beyond about 30 to 45 degrees of hip extension, it becomes a hamstring exercise, not a glute exercise.
Yeah.
So you can almost do little pendulums into 45 degrees of hip flexion. So and that's why I call them. I do sort of half range type deads.
Yeah.
That'll isolate your glute, right?
Yeah.
If you go into a full dead, like even deficit type deadlifts where people touch their toes.
Yes.
The first 60 degrees of that is hamstring.
Yeah.
So look, just little tweaking your exercises a little bit for that.
And when you do tweak them like that, you can adjust the load appropriately.
100%.
So when you're doing just a glute dominated
Load it up,
RDL,
man.
you load it up,
That's
and
right,
you don't need to get down. Then you can focus on your hamstrings and train them as a whole.
Absolutely.
For sure. Absolutely. So they're probably my top 5, those kind of exercises. And how about you, man? What's your top 5?
Yeah, look, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
I think all of those hit the mark, definitely. What are your thoughts on then adding in kickbacks, adding in those isolation movements, potentially a little bit lighter, but...
No, absolutely. I'd class them as finishers.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like finish, or I really like pre-exhaust techniques. So I've got a little hypertrophy sequence that I use where I'll use those kind of isolation techniques first.
Yes.
Call that a pre-exhaust.
Yeah.
Basically feel the muscle. Then I'll get into something more substantial like a compound move, be it a Bulgarian or a squat, or one of our versions of a deadlift. And then I also like to circle back and then finish with an isolated, say, kickback or something, and coin that a post exhaust.
Yeah.
So to explain basically my theory, I like to set up a muscle by doing an isolation exercise, one of I guess our smaller exercise categories.
Yes.
And call that a pre-exhaust, do say like moderate to high reps, 8 to 12. Then I'll go into like a major compound lift.
Yeah.
And this is just my, my hypertrophy sequence. So isolation exercise, 8 to 12, break into something heavy, say like 6 to 8. Then after those heavy reps, I'll throw in some kind of isometric.
Yeah.
So absolutely break down all levels of strength. Try and break down concentric, eccentric, isometric.
Yes.
Then I'll throw in a couple of rest pause reps where you put the weight down, take a few breaths, and then have just enough rest to bang out say 2 to 3 extra reps. Anyone that's trained with me will be visualizing this set right now because I do it all the time. Then I'll drop the weight.
Yeah.
Use the same compound exercise and bang out another 8 to 12 reps. And usually I'll employ something like 1 1/4 reps.
Yes.
Then I'll circle back to the original isolated exercise and get that post burn, and I'll coin that my post exhaust. That's basically my hypertrophy sequence.
I love that.
That's normally, $250 consult, right?
There you go. I know. People are making money listening to this podcast. Absolutely.
You're welcome.
So my next question, guys, I mean, we're going to have to do a part 2 because this is a big topic and there's so much involved here. But I want to ask this question because I think this is on the minds of a lot of guys and girls training glutes. How many times should they really train their glutes every week? Do we train it every day? Do we train it 3 times? What's the magic number?
Well, the answer is it depends, right? Because you got to think of what you're doing. Okay,
Yes.
so for example, if you're doing body weight band work, then your recovery from that is going to be pretty quick, right?
Absolutely.
It's not particularly neurally demanding.
Yes.
Versus if you're you're doing heavy, squats and deads and that sort of thing. There's a neural load to that.
Yes.
It's going to take you longer to get over it, right? So I do think, and you can load your glutes up volume wise, right? I think 3 or 4 days a week you can do it, but the way I do it is because I think your glutes, and I talk about total volume load across. So what I mean by volume load is sets, reps, and weight.
Yes.
And you can come up with a tonnage, a total tonnage. But so for example, glutes. If I'm training physique girls to develop their glutes, right? We're going to do 30, 34 sets a week. So that will be across 3 workouts where day 1 will be 12 to 14 sets of glutes. We'll do 8 sets of quads and 8 sets of hammies, right? Then on the next time, we'll hit that in a different sequence and we'll do 12 sets of quads. We'll do 8 sets of hammies and 10 sets of glutes in that order. And then the third day, we mix it again and we'll start with hammies and we'll do 12 sets of hammies. Then we'll hit glutes for 10 sets and then we'll hit quads for 8 sets.
Love it.
So you prioritize your workout like glute, quad, hammy, but you're still hitting glute, quad, hammy in each of those workouts.
Yes.
And don't leave your hammies behind. Or when you turn side on, you'll have a bubble button, no hamstring.
That's right.
So your glute ham tie-in from the side is hugely important. And,
Hugely
you know,
important,
and when you're talking on stage and you're differentiating, because everyone's got glutes now,
Yeah.
right, and have done for a while. So
what's
in
gonna
my
be the point
mind,
of difference?
hammies is the next glute, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You've got to
Exactly
bring
right.
them in, right? And so, and from the side is where it'll matter with
Yes.
hamstrings, big time. So that's what I think. I think in the ballpark of 3 days a week.
Yeah.
You can go 4, and you could do 5. I think total load 30, 34 sets a week.
Yes.
So what is that? If you're doing 4 sets per exercise, you do the math, and it's 4 8s are 32. So that's 8 exercises. You know, or however you want to do that.
Yeah, great.
That's how I do it. And I'll shift that around with a lot of those body parts. I come back to the muscle fiber type distribution thing, right?
Yes.
Glutes, max, and meads are mostly 50-50 fast and slow. So it's the perfect arrangement versus, say, a quad, which might be much more fast twitch dominant. Sorry, it's actually more slow twitch dominant.
Yes.
Versus a hamstring's more fast twitch dominant. So, so you kind of, if you're mindful of that, you can tweak how you load them up.
So
intensity-wise.
fast twitch, we should be training lower reps, heavier, heavier weight.
Yeah,
yeah,
100%. And if you're slower, and the other thing, sorry, just a general comment, and this is on cadaver, so cadaver, dead body, right? Studies, but females tend, and this is a big generalization, but tend to, even within the fiber type distributions, will tend to have more slower twitch fibers in their glutes than blokes. So again, that means more reps.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not huge. It's maybe 5%, but it's a thing, right?
Absolutely.
So
Anything to get the edge.
but hitting them 6 days a week, I don't think you need to. I think you can get the same benefits from doing them 3 days a week, and then on the other days you might do, because it doesn't really. I mean, a lot of girls don't train chest at all, but you want your delts. You want some delts, some lateral
that's
delts,
right.
and some rear delt.
Yeah.
You want a little bit of bicep and tricep and back. So, well, that's what I'm doing. I'm telling them to hit them 3 4 days.
3 to 4 times a week. You'd agree with that, right?
It's hard to add on to that when I basically agree with everything he says, and I don't want to confuse people, but I do think he made a good point about exercise prescription and basically understanding the impact that will have on the rest of your training week, whether it's your CNS, or just recruitment of let's say your back when you're doing, I keep saying I'm a major lift guy, so I love my squats, love my deadlifts, but they're going to have a role to play at the end of the week. So I think it's really, I basically agree with everything Max said. I agree with hitting it from every angle in regards to load as well and rep schemes. But just being conscious of that overall volume and spreading it out, say 2 to 3 days a week.
Yeah. So I think.
I was just going to say, because I know we're conscious of time, but like some of the common mistakes, I think there's not enough variation. I think there needs to be more. People need a little bit more variation.
Right.
6 days a week, you'll end up overloading them. Right.
Yes.
Don't forget the upper and lower glute. So lower glute, squat, deadlift, lunge. Right.
Yes.
Upper glute, thrust, lateral bands, sideline work in external rotation.
Yes.
And even the thrust technique itself, it's tuck your chin down to your sternum, you want your tibia at 90 degrees straight up, right? And you're thinking of you're raising your sternum to the ceiling and you're tucking your bum in. You're not. It's not a full heave where you go like you don't look at the ceiling, right? You want to look straight and bring your chin down. It makes a big difference. And if you haven't tried it, everybody try it.
Yes.
It'll make a difference. So mix up your upper and lower glute.
In regards to like form and cues and techniques, that's obviously something I address on a daily basis. And my personal thoughts and feelings on it is people go wrong when they lift weight. When they focus on the barbell or they focus on the object that they're lifting, that's when they go wrong.
Yeah.
Dial it back. I have a rule with my guys where they're not allowed to do an exercise if they can't visualize the prime mover and what it's doing.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Right.
So, and that's where the whole social media and video thing comes into play, because people can replicate exercises. And that's what's happening with this barbell hip thrust, for example. They're going, oh, okay, cool. That chick's, she's thrusting thrusting a barbell in the air. So they load up a barbell and they thrust it in the air, where they need to dial it back and understand the mechanics a little more, visualize the mechanics of the glute. Basically, muscles get shorter. We contract them. So visualize the glutes and the hamstrings working together to squeeze, and then as an end result, the barbell moves up. A cue for my hip thrust guys is I say squeeze into the stretch, away from the stretch and into the squeeze. So that could be their rib cage. So when the barbell's going down, they can kind of lean away a little bit, lean away from the stretch when the glutes stretch in. When you squeeze, pull into the squeeze. And I find that helps a lot, Mac.
Yeah, man, 100%. And the only other tip I would say on the thrust is your scapular position. You want the bench, if you're doing them that way, I'm talking about your shoulders on the bench, you want it the edge of the bench aligned with the middle of your scapula, not the lower scapula. So your whole back's not on the bench. It's just the half of it, the upper part. And get your shins upright. So so what I mean by that is don't tuck your feet under your bum. But you don't want your feet too far forward or it'll become a hamstring exercise. So just stick with 90 degrees, feet flat on the floor for your thrust. And you're in business.
Love the advice, crew. We have the glute masters in the house. We're going to have to do it. We're going to have to do a part 2.
Yeah, we need a part 2.
Guys, I think we've got some great tips here for everyone on glutes. I really can't wait for episode 2 or part 2 on this subject. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Everyone, listen up and re-listen to this. There's so many nuggets of gold that we've just gone through.
I think this was a real good one.
It was intense, and I think you guys are going to absolutely love part 2. Guys, we'll see you on the next episode.
Awesome. See ya.